Sounds good. Okay. Okay. So, yep, today is July 28th, 2007, Martin family reunion. And I'm here with Jane Anderson, Tom Strickler, and Bruce Foster. Sorry, yes, and Ruby Martin, and we're waiting for Norman Thrower. Also, Paul Drake, Tommy Strickler, Anya Polstra, Emma Drake. And others will come and go.
What about all the spouses?
All the spouses, that's right. Well, Jane is...
I'm here alone.
Yeah, and you're related to the Martin family.
That's right.
How?
My mother was a sister of Greg Martin, so he was my uncle. And I lived with that family for 2 years when I was a sophomore and junior in high school. And I think that's one of the main reasons they include me, because I bugged that family for several years.
Where was that?
In Wadsworth,
Okay.
Wadsworth, Ohio, where Greg was a doctor, and then subsequently my brother Jack went into business with Greg he was a doctor too.
Okay.
After getting a lot of help from Uncle Greg.
You want me to? I don't know what
Tom? How are you related to the Martin family?
Martin family. Distantly.
Married to Mildred.
Yep. Your spouse was
No, I
Mildred?
don't know what you want to know.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well,
Starting at the beginning.
yeah, we're just talking about how we're all connected, why we're all here.
Oh,
So,
that's fine.
yeah, okay.
Because your first wife was Mildred, and she was a Martin, and that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Did she pay her way?
And Bruce?
I'm Bruce Foster. I'm married to Trudy Martin, and I'm the first of the in-laws to join the family.
Okay, what year was that?
1947.
All right. And Ruby?
I married John Martin, and I joined the family in August of 1955 when we got married.
Okay. And, oh yes, Norman.
I joined the family also in 1947, but later than
Okay.
Bruce and Trudy. We were married in England, but came over here together. So that was the bare facts. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, Trudy got a letter from India recommending that she get acquainted with Norman. She got that letter 1 week after we were engaged. This was in '45, and so she stuck the letter on the thing on the bottom of the stairs. And Betty came by and picked it up and says, "I'm going to answer that letter."
So that's how.
So you were pen pals for a while,
In a
weren't you?
sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Were you in India at the time?
No, I was
No.
back in England.
Yeah, well, Trudy and I fell in love by mail too.
Is that right?
Yeah, I was over in France, and I got a letter from. She was about ready to graduate from college, and I got a letter from my classmate and her classmate in high school, Doug Stewart, and he told me he was out in the Navy out in the Pacific, and he says, "If you want to get Trudy, you better get busy because she's about to graduate, and she's going steady with a pre-ministerial who wants her to go with him."
But you had known her since India, since
Oh yeah,
Woodstock.
I'd known her ever since, well, 3 or 4 years old, probably.
Really?
One additional piece of information. One interesting linkage in all of this was Sir John and Lady Marshall. They were at Taxila. He was the Surveyor General of the Archaeological Survey of India, and they provided a link with the Martin family. Actually, Dr. Martin was the physician, as you know, of a hospital in Taxila. The only other significant European family was that of Sir John and Lady Marshall, and he was head of the Archaeological Survey of all of India, but he was working at that time at this very interesting place called Taxila, which was the furthest extent of the travels of Alexander the Great in Asia. And there he made the famous statement. Alexander said, there's no more worlds to conquer.
Huh.
So that was it.
Wow.
Did you ever meet them? Did you ever meet?
Yeah,
Did you?
they were very helpful actually. In fact, Sir John was not very well at the time. He was an old man, but Lady Marshall attended the wedding. She was very prominently in the wedding in England. Yeah. Yeah.
Might as well say there's a foosball.
Yeah, there's a foosball tournament going on below with
And
much
Betty,
fanfare.
Betty took her trousseau over to England without ever having met you, correct?
Well, that would hardly be the case. No. What happened when we engaged, you're saying, a lot followed, including England was under heavy rationing at the time, and the Martins were very generous in supplying the makings of a wedding feast, which was almost impossible in England in those years. Okay, and so I think other things followed as well, but I'm not sure of all the details. No, I wouldn't say that she had everything that she needed at that time, but it arrived, let's say. Okay, yeah. And although the Martins were, as I discovered, you know, Mrs. Anna used to say, the only time we really made money in medicine was after we joined with the group. Before that, being missionaries and not, Dr. Martin didn't even know in which bank his money was. She said. I mean, he had absolutely no interest, like the missionaries, in money making, and so. But when they joined Peterson and bought that office, they began to make real money.
Was that in Wadsworth? Or?
Yes, in Wadsworth, yeah. But in those earlier years, they were still paying back debts to Auntie Frances and that kind of. They were really not very well off at all in those years. But after he joined with Peterson, Peterson was a good businessman as well as being a doctor. Is this a feeling you get about all of this, Ruby?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
Ruby, can you tell us a little bit about the years when John Gregory was a doctor in Wadsworth, when they lived there?
Well, let's see, I didn't come on the scene until 1955, so it was well into his, practice years. I remember John talking about the time they spent in the little town of Clinton, because the office was on one side of the house and they lived on the other side of the house. And John remembered his dad taking his tonsils out on the kitchen table.
Oh my goodness.
So, and instead of being paid with money, he often would get eggs or fruits and vegetables.
Was this the Clinton in
Ohio.
In Ohio?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
When they came back from India, they went to Vermont first, and that was an impossible place to make a living for his family. So he went to Clinton, I think because of a classmate who had been there from the medical school. And then a classmate in Wadsworth needed some help with his practice too, because he was no longer in good health. So he came to Wadsworth, and eventually Jack Wallace joined the practice, and the other doctor was one who was from Rittman.
Corny McGrew, maybe?
Yes,
Yeah.
Dr. McGrew. So there were the three of them that practiced together. And it was a very well thought of practice because they were conscientious and considerate of their patients, and they ran a very good office. They were well liked in the community, all three of them.
Yeah. Jane, do you know when your brother joined that practice?
Well, let's see, he graduated, actually he was in the service for a while after we came back from India. And he was on, at the college, he was on a pre-med program. Well, they needed doctors so much that if you had good grades, they were taking you after 3 years instead of 4, so he did get in a year ahead.
Okay.
And let's see, I graduated in 51. He must have, 49, he would have, probably about 53 or 4. Probably 54, maybe.
Okay.
How many years? Is 4 years in med school?
4 years for
4
med
years
school.
for med school.
Now, was that Case Western Reserve?
Case Western, thank you, yeah.
Just
Case
where
Western.
Greg.
Where Greg went too. And Greg helped him. He helped to pay his way, so that was.
Oh, Greg helped to pay his way?
Yes, he did.
Huh.
Certainly by 1954, Jack was there because Jimmy Wallace was born in 1954.
That's right. That's a good, that's right.
Jane, do you have memories of your grandparents, of Howard and
Yes,
Elizabeth?
I do. We happened to be on furlough the year they had their 50th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And it was a marvelous time. All the relatives came from all around, so it was.
Where was that?
That was in New Concord, Ohio, and
Were they-
we'd have to look up the date. I don't remember the exact date. It'll be in Francis's book.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was a great time.
Did any of the others of you meet? Did you know them? Did you know Howard and Elizabeth?
What?
Did you know Howard and Elizabeth Martin? Or was that?
I never met them.
No.
No, likewise.
Did
Any
you ever
other-
meet them?
Any other memories of the house in Concord, Ohio?
Well, at one point, when John was in Muskegon, he lived in that house,
New Concord.
in the New Concord house, yes.
It had no indoor toilet, as I understand it, and Anna Martin characteristically required that to be done before they would move. I mean, it wasn't much of a place, actually.
Now, is that where Mom went to ninth grade
Yeah, I
with
think
John
I-
Glenn?
I believe,
Probably,
yes, that's
Yes.
correct, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It had a screened-in porch on the second floor that it had a row of beds, and so when extra people came, they slept on that porch. It also had a hand pump, and there were 2 cups that hung there. One was for family, and one was for other people. And my brother Jack used to laugh because he said that Granny always felt there are 2 kinds of people in this world, family and other people.
That's true.
Yes, and John always reminded us, our family, of how he enjoyed sleeping on that sleeping porch.
Yeah,
It was a great place.
was.
Well, getting re-established after India was a very difficult thing, apparently. Dr. Biggs, you mentioned the doctor.
He's the doctor in
Yeah,
Wadsworth
right, that's
that
right.
invited him to come.
He was
to
very
Wadsworth.
helpful. He had a good practice, but he'd also invested well in real estate and lived in the apartments that he had financed, and then he took me once to Cleveland. Took me to a most upscale kind of a restaurant, not the places the kind of place that Martin's went. He lived very well, actually. He was a very successful doctor, but he was also helpful to
But
the
he
Martins.
invited Greg there because he was in poor health.
Yes,
Am I
that's
correct?
that's absolutely
Yes.
true. Yeah,
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 well,
he retired early. Yeah.
Trudy used to remember and almost have nightmares about the wrecks that took place on the railroad there, right
Yeah.
quarter mile or so from their house.
Really?
Because one of his sources of income
Yeah,
was
well,
the railroad.
The highway came down a steep hill. Right at the bottom of the hill, it made a left-handed turn right across the railroad
Oh.
track.
Would that have been Clinton rather than Wadsworth?
This was Clinton.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, no, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Well, Trudy never actually lived in Wadsworth.
That's right.
She was in college
Mhm.
when they moved to Wadsworth.
Mhm.
And so, actually, we did all our romancing in Wadsworth. But,
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, John talked about the time you had a chess game going with someone, and John and Jack Wallace mixed the figures up so that they disturbed the chess game for
I've heard
you.
this famous story.
Now, Jane, you went and after your mom died, you lived with the Martins.
Yes, I did.
With John and
Yes,
Ann.
I lived in Wadsworth.
Great.
yeah, she did while we were romancing.
Yes, yes, right.
She used to haul down, that last, we had a record player there that played about 10 records. And then it just played the last record over and over and over again.
Well, John loved to tease Trudy.
What?
John loved to tease Trudy.
Yeah, well, we always locked the front door so that John couldn't rush in on it. But Jane would holler down, "You played that last record 12 times."
So you were in high school then?
Yes, yes, I was, yeah.
Now,
And the Martins were family for me. I had always wanted a sister, and so now I had 3 sisters. It was great. But I had a brother.
Yeah.
John and I were good friends, though.
Yeah.
He was just a year ahead of me in high school, and we had some of his friends, and my friends were.
So none of the girls were living at home when you were there?
Mildred was teaching somewhere
Yeah,
around there.
Mildred
was there
living
for a
out-
year.
In
I think.
Barberton.
She was
Mother
living
taught
out-
in Barberton,
she was living out in the
yeah.
attic, and she taught
and
in
didn't she
Barberton.
live in the attic of Grandma's house?
Might have, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I learned to drive by hitchhiking. Actually, since I was a veteran, they gave me a driver's license, well, in the state of Ohio. I'd never driven in my life. So when Mildred was teaching in Barberton, I would hitchhike out to meet her when she got out of school, and she would ride beside me
Okay.
and have me drive in to Wadsworth.
Wow.
She was a very trusting lady, wasn't she?
Yeah, and we had, for our honeymoon, we used her little 2-seater car, and we went across the Adirondacks towards Gettysburg, and we could tell on that car, we could tell how the altitude by what the temperature reading. We would hope to get over the peak before it boiled.
I didn't know Mother had a car before.
Oh yeah, it was a pre-war Chevy, I think, but I'm not sure of that. But it was just 2-seater with a trunk.
Okay.
When Tom and Mildred were married, they had a new car, didn't you? You had a new, what was that, a Dodge or a Plymouth? You had a new automobile car when you got married. And you,
That was a long time ago, I already know.
and, I
You
remember,
saved up the money from being in the Army and selling all your rations for cigarettes and beer. That much I know.
And it was probably the only car you ever bought new.
Who told you that?
No, I just imagined that.
And when Mildred and Tom were dating, I was living in Worcester at the time and had my own room with a double bed. sometimes Mildred would spend the night with me after a date so that she wouldn't have to drive home late. So I like to think that I contributed to this.
You were in a dorm?
No, I was lived in a private home for 2 years. I worked
Whose home?
Kinsvatter's. He was the Lutheran minister, and I earned my room and board there. And we lived just 2 doors up from Babcock Hall. So I stayed on there for a year of college too, 2 years of college actually. So you ought to tell them about the time you rode behind someone on a motorcycle back to Worcester.
After Worcester.
No, on your way to Worcester, some friend offered you a ride on his motorcycle.
Oh, yeah.
You wrecked in Lodi.
Well, he's an old friend of mine.
He
Yeah.
was an old friend.
Yes, and he wanted to. He worked at Smithville.
Oh,
They have a restaurant.
right, yeah, Smithville Inn.
So he offered to take me to that restaurant and give me a dessert or something if I would drive in there. So I drove in there. Oh no, yeah, he got on a motorcycle then, and I was on the back of the motorcycle. And he drove up to there, and there was a truck in the way, and he jumped off. And I woke up in the hospital, Lodi Hospital. Who's from Lodi?
Yeah.
My family, Kay and her husband are moving to Lodi.
Yep, just moving there.
And so didn't Grandpa come down and take care of you?
He did, but there was another doctor there who met me when I was brought into the hospital.
And wasn't there some problem about that doctor treating you?
No, there's no.
Okay, because then Grandpa came down and took care of you.
Yeah.
So evidently he wanted you to marry his daughter.
That was premeditated.
Where do you get all these things?
Well, Trudy and her mother schemed
Yes.
to get Mildred and Tom together.
Oh,
Aha!
we never knew that.
We never knew that.
Aha!
Sometimes a little scheming is needed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Wow.
Do you have any other memories, Dad, of the Wadsworth house or?
Yeah, we were, spent a lot of time at the Wadsworth house. And it was a big house, and we were way up in the attic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It had a lot of room.
and a backyard.
Yeah, good
Nice
garden.
garden.
Nice garden.
Greg Martin kept up a good garden.
Yeah.
I think it roses is what he grew.
Yes, and my two girls still remember and talk about the brick road in front of the house.
And it's still brick.
It's still brick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember.
Highland.
Highland, yeah, Highland
But
Avenue.
didn't he grow daylilies as well?
Yes, he grew daylilies because in my yard I have daylilies from Greg Martin's garden because Uncle John brought them to
Right.
me and to Dennis and Candace.
And we have some too.
Yeah, yeah.
You
What?
were that way?
In Oak Ridge, I have them. Uh-huh. The deer eat them every year.
Wasn't the road brick too?
That's what you
Yes,
just
that I would
said,
have
yeah.
just
Yeah,
said.
Tom and I had an interesting experience when this was just after Dennis and
Howie?
Or
no,
Paige.
the
Candace.
Oh, Candace.
Page
Paige.
were born.
Oh,
That the girls, Trudy and Mildred, we had 2 cars between us, and so Trudy and Mildred took one of them and went down and picked up Betty, and the 5 of them with the 2 kids went to visit Wadsworth. And we had been told that they were going to start back on a certain date. Well, Tom and I decided to catch him by surprise, and we drove down, straight down from New Haven to Wadsworth to catch him. Then we were be able to come back with him separately. Well, it turned out we got in the door, and Dr. Martin says, "Well, they just left." So we ate, got back in the car, and headed back. And when we got to New Haven, the furnace had gone out. And so Trudy was down trying to get the furnace started, and she was mad as a wet hen.
So you all lived together in New Haven?
Yeah, we shared, well, it was part of a barn. It was a building that on a map of New Haven in 1860 was the county poor farm.
But later they bought a house, didn't they?
So obviously it wasn't built as
the poorhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it wasn't built as a poorhouse, obviously. So it must have been built way before then.
Yeah, but the guy who ran it was.
What?
The guy who ran it had to run the poorhouse with
Yeah.
it.
Bruce, the Martins bought a house later there, didn't they?
Not that house.
No, I understand
In
that.
New Haven.
In New Haven.
She, Mrs. Martin bought the house that she wanted us to move into it.
I understand, yeah.
Well, the girls decided that was not an economic thing to
I
do,
see, okay.
so they rented the house.
I see, okay.
And so Grandma Martin was getting rent for this house, which she didn't want for that.
How far was it from Wadsworth to New Haven?
Oh gosh.
I don't think it went that way. It went from New Haven to Wadsworth.
How far was that route?
Well, it's about 500 miles across Pennsylvania, and then you've got about 100 miles into New Haven and New York, and maybe another 100.
Wow.
Into Worcester, Wadsworth in Ohio.
It was a full day.
I'm not sure that that's exactly right, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
There's a geographer over
Yeah,
there.
that's about correct, I think. That figure.
Well, I knew the Martin family from church. When I was about a 4th or 5th grader, Grandma Ann Martin was my Sunday school teacher.
Really?
And I knew about Mildred teaching art in Barberton, because that's where I went to high school. And John had come home to live with his parents sometime around, 1951, because he started that fall with his job in Babcock and Wilcox in Barberton. And I had graduated from college in 1954 and was living in Barberton with my parents and teaching 3rd grade. And Reverend Finley at the church decided that John and I would like to know each other. And so he introduced us, gave John my phone number, and what John did before he called me up was to go across the street to my friend who lived across the street from the Martins, Mary Brenneman, to find out what I looked like in the yearbook. So then he decided it was okay to call. And it took a very short time for us to decide we were going to get married. It was not a long courtship. And I told him that I thought it was a good idea to be engaged, but we needed to wait until we knew each other a little better. Well, that was okay at first. But then he said, my sisters are coming home in August. So it's get married or forget it. So I didn't want to let him go. So we got married in August. What, Tom?
He says that you probably forgot.
So the interesting thing about marrying into the Martin family is that you were treated like a daughter immediately.
So Ruby, how long was your courtship?
From January of 1955 till April 1st when he proposed. on April Fool's Day. And I said, are you kidding? And then the next morning he was going away for a weekend with his Boy Scouts. And on the way out of the house he said to his mother, by the way, I got engaged last night. And then we got married in August of 1955.
For about 6 months.
Right,
7.
right. It was a quick decision, but it was a good decision.
You had to hurry up and get married because Kay was born in 55.
No, I was born in 56.
Oh, 56.
What are you doing here?
So can I ask a question from the youngest generation? For all the folks who knew our great-grandparents, like you just said, you know, that you all were welcomed into the family. But what are some just so we can get an idea of our great-grandparents, what were some of their hobbies that you all remember that they would do? What did they enjoy
Grandma
doing?
Ann Martin did the jigsaw puzzles.
Oh, yes,
Okay?
always.
She was the jigsaw puzzle queen.
What about the greenhouse that was out in back of the house? Who did that?
I remember when they put that up, and he grew wonderful flowers in the wintertime. And when our Janet was born in March of 1958, he brought me some lovely ranicula flowers from that greenhouse. And I later found out that he didn't like to share those flowers, but he was so generous that he had brought me a lovely bouquet, and it was just very, very nice.
Yeah, Trudy was the greatest puzzle solver of any kind. It didn't matter what kind of a puzzle, except a crossword puzzle.
Okay, but she had a mathematical
that took
mind.
spelling and that.
Yeah.
But I can remember one time she got one of these puzzles of, you know, metals stuck together. And
Oh,
all.
yes, you have to.
And I'd look at them and say, well, that's impossible. But she stayed up till after 1 o'clock, and we were early to bedders. But she wasn't going to go to bed until she got that. This was a Christmas evening, until she got that puzzle solved.
She stuck to
I
it.
think also, wasn't John Gregory Martin an avid reader?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He was kind of book of the month club reader.
Yeah.
He'd read all those books. Yeah.
And he played
I
violin.
remember
Yes,
the Christmas
that's right,
that he had the book Dr. Zhivago.
Oh.
And Grandma was pestering him to put the book down and forget about it because she wanted him to do some other things. And he said, I've got to hurry up and read this book because I'm going to give it to Bruce for Christmas. And what happened was that Bruce also gave that book to Grandpa. So, but I don't know if Bruce read it before he gave it away, but Greg had read it before he gave it away. The other thing that Grandma did so much was to knit.
Yeah.
And she was so proud of the fact that when my daughters were in college, they still liked the sweaters that she would knit for them.
Yeah,
It was a real treasure for the
Yeah.
girls.
it was a treasure for us.
I've still got them, and they're in my chest. Yeah.
You know, every time we visited you, our kids would come away with all kinds of books. And Trudy just was really fascinated by that.
Well, I followed the pattern of Aunt Frances, who sent Jane's children, and probably your children too. Aunt Frances always sent us books for special days. So I wanted to follow her pattern because I admired her so much.
The other thing, Greg loved classical music, especially violin music. And I just remember him lying on the floor in front of the
Stereo, hi-fi.
Yeah, hi-fi, and listening to good violin music.
And he played the violin
And
too.
yes.
Yeah.
But he'd
Yeah.
come home at noon from the office, have his lunch, and lie down there and listen for a while.
Well, I can remember soon after Grandpa died, your brother
Jack.
Jack came down and sat at that same chair to listen, And she came down and turned off the thing and says, I don't have to put up with this anymore.
And?
And, yeah.
She always said she had a tin ear or something. Yeah.
Okay.
But as a soulmate, I was so impressed with the fact that she realized that he was in a stressful position with taking care of people and their illnesses, and their home life was peaceful.
Actually, she permitted him, rationed him a little bit, but he was allowed to buy these expensive records, actually, but not unlimited, of course. But so she took care of she indulged him in that passion of his, but with some limitations, obviously.
And perhaps she made that statement too at that point about she didn't have to put up with it because it must have been a very strong reminder.
That's right, it was probably
But the one thing about Grandpa was, when he got on the road to drive, he
was terrible.
he was always trying to break records.
Terrible driver.
I think he came up to visit Kathy just after Kathy was born, and then he drove all the way around New England, Maine, and everything else. I can't remember for sure, but it was not more than a day and a half. Got back to.
I remember going up to Cleveland with him one Sunday before we were married, and driving back, it was just a terrible trip because he really was not a very good driver and he drove very fast. And Grandma got after him a little bit and she said, well, why are you in such a hurry? He said, I have to get home to see a patient.
Actually, they were very generous. We were carless. That's like being eyeless in Gaza. We were carless in America. Betty didn't drive, actually. She didn't learn to drive until after we were married and got a car. And for the first 5 years, every summer they would take us on a rather long trip down the Virginia to see the large plantation houses with John in that case. And when we arrived there at Williamsburg, John said, why did we see all of these houses? It's all together here in Williamsburg. We didn't need to see all those plantation houses down the James River. Another time they took us to the Thousand Islands by way of New Haven, actually, when the other sons-in-law were in New Haven, and lots of other places. Otherwise, I wouldn't have actually traveled very much. I like to travel wherever I'm at great distances and so on. And I got the benefit and enjoyment of these trips over a several-year period in the eastern United States, which I enjoyed greatly.
Do you remember the story about when the Martins were in Pakistan and driving and they hit what was it?
Jogging?
A cow.
Driving, they hit a cow?
He knows that story.
Yeah, it seemed like they had two different stories.
Well, Tom tells the story and then Trudy would add to it. Yeah. Do you want to tell that story?
I don't remember the story.
Well, the
Except we
story
ran into
also,
a cow.
what happened was there was a man who came from one of the northern cities in Pakistan, up near Afghanistan, and he was actually a leader in his community.
So they had this car accident. They had hit.
That's not till later. You first
Oh,
have to say.
this was on the Khyber, all the way up to the Khyber Pass. And they spent the night in a village up in the tribal territory. It was a regular fortress. And they had guards on the battlements and everything else.
And the Khan, the tribal leader, according to
Well, I think when Grandpa drove back to pick up something, to I don't know, get some medicine or something, to come back, and the rest of them, they ran into this tribal chieftain who knew Grandpa, and so he invited them to spend the night there.
And offered them security in the territory which he controlled, but couldn't extend that to an area beyond his domain, so to speak.
But what had happened was the fella had a bad leg.
Yes, that's right.
And he came to Taxila Hospital hoping to not lose his leg.
That's correct. Yeah.
And Grandpa did something, some kind of, and fitted him with crutches. And so he didn't lose his leg, because he said if he did lose his leg, they wouldn't let him be chief of his territory. So then, as they were traveling to the Khyber Pass, they hit a cow, right? Yeah. And then why don't you finish the story when they hit the cow?
Well, they knocked the cow over, and I think he was killed in the accident. And the rest of the villagers were very angry.
Yeah.
And they were getting more and more agitated with Dr. Martin there. And suddenly everything got quiet, and everyone that was making all the trouble backed off. And here came this fellow that he'd fixed
The chief, yeah.
On his crutches.
and came down and said, well, we're just delighted to have you here, and you saved my life. Now will you please come and stay with us overnight? So we stayed overnight.
And that calmed it.
I'll jump ahead a little bit because being the last married, we had the youngest grandchildren, and Kay was 3 and Janet 1.5 years when Grandpa Greg died. But they have fond memories of grandmother. One of the special times was when Kay was graduating from college, and Grandma came and stayed in the dorm with Kay. Kay said she was the only kid on campus whose grandmother had slept in her room.
Yeah.
It was a very special time.
Yeah.
Grandma came to my graduation from medical school,
Yeah.
and it was 1 block from the medical dental apartments where I lived to the graduation ceremony. And when she got halfway there, she had chest pain. And so right there to the left was Louisville General Hospital. So I walked in there, got a wheelchair, came out and wheeled her over to the graduation ceremony.
What year would that have been, Howard?
1979.
Okay.
So it was just a year before she died.
Mm-hmm. She was a wonderful mother-in-law.
Yeah, well, in the frontier territories, certain tribes were responsible for safety on those roads. It went on in Pakistan too, because I was in Peshawar for a year in Pakistan. And they told the story when I was there about there was a big truck with a lot of valuable stuff in it, and this group of tribesmen took it over. I mean, well, they were taking it over, and they were debating whether to rob it or not. And they said one of them came out with a calculator, tried to figure out what the price was, and if the price they could get from that was greater than the subsidy they would lose, they were going to take it. Now, it's one of those stories. It may have been apocryphal,
Yeah.
but it was characteristic of that. But if there was any robbery on that road, that tribe lost its subsidy.
Well, how was it that Greg Martin made the decision to stay in Taxila for so many years when the Presbyterian Church only wanted him to serve for a couple years?
I don't think that's true.
That's not true?
I think there was a loyalty to his family. I mean, this is the way I understand it. To his father, all the time he had spent there and so on. Because he could have stayed home and made money even during the Depression, I suppose. But he didn't. He stayed there. And
Well, he was convinced. He told me that was the easiest problem he had, because he was just out of medical school. He didn't understand the American culture at all, and he'd spent all his life over there, and he says that was the easiest thing for me to do. I was in an area that I knew about, and I never heard anything about this.
Well, was it not true that he was funded to go to medical school by the Presbyterian Church?
Correct, yes,
That's
right.
the story
So,
I know.
so he had some responsibility to pay that back. But when the British were going to, he was very pro-British, actually. When the British were going to leave, he anticipated that and came home. And that was the reason for leaving the mission field more than anything else, I believe.
Well, I have the feeling that it also involved where Betty and Mildred were age-wise, because
That's right.
because their mother did not want them to have to come home and go to college with no family around. And so it was necessary to earn some monies to send them to college.
Well, what Trudy's opinion was that the reason they didn't go back was because Betty had graduated from high school over there.
No, Betty graduated from Canal Fulton High School.
Yeah.
Okay, well, anyway, it was getting around time for her to graduate, and they decided, I mean, the mother decided she wasn't going to go back,
Correct.
and so he decided to stay too.
Both Betty and Mildred graduated, I'm sure Mildred too, from Canal Fulton High School, because there was some controversy that came up about Clinton. So they paid tuition for the two girls to go to Canal Fulton, which was an adjoining community. Trudy graduated from Clinton.
Yeah.
John went to Clinton until they went to Wadsworth, and so John spent the last 2 years of high school at Wadsworth, his junior and
Yeah,
senior
he
year.
graduated from Wadsworth, I know
Yes.
that. Because he was graduated when I was
1946.
romancing Trudy.
Yes, when he was harassing Trudy and teasing her.
I'm surprised that they were able to send their children to Worcester. I think some special provision was made because they had been missionaries and that kind of thing. So that made it financially possible. But they were very impoverished at that time, as I understand it.
But they did very well once they got to Wadsworth,
Yeah,
because
absolutely,
he was a very good doctor.
right.
Yeah,
indeed.
I also heard that they got this, managed to buy the land and there were dozens of individual farmers. They had to get them all, and they all wanted cash and silver. So he had about, a whole truckload of rupees, silver rupees, that he had to take.
This was back in India.
And they dished it out to each one of them.
Yeah, right. Well, that was when the mission was established, I think, wasn't it, by his father?
Well, the mission was much older than that.
Than Greg's father. Yeah.
What?
Then, what time frame are we talking about when this transaction, this money transaction?
Well, this was
That was 1921 in order to purchase the land.
23 or 20,
Okay.
22, 23, something like that.
I'd always heard that they lived in tents for the first.
Yes, I heard that.
Yeah.
Did he actually do surgery in tents?
I don't know.
I remember Anne saying one time that she would never have gone to India if her husband had not been a medical doctor, for them to have care of the children, because it was a difficult place to live with young children.
Who was Samuel Martin?
He was the uncle
Of Howard?
Of Howard.
of Howard Martin.
Yeah, and he had been, was he the first Martin to be a missionary in
Yeah.
India then?
And he went out in the 1860s, I think.
1860s. And that's who, the town of Martinpur is named after him.
Yeah.
That's right.
And what kind of missionary was he? What was he doing? He was a preacher?
Preacher,
Minister?
yeah.
I think, and he was the one who talked them into going out to India.
Okay.
And they went in the 1880s, was it?
Yes, Howard and Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think he came out in the middle of the mass movements, or the beginning of the mass movements, where all of a sudden, a lot of the Hindus that were untouchables,
Right.
all of a sudden whole villages would convert to Christianity. And
These people were known as rice Christians.
Rice Christians, yeah.
Well, when they came home, John was 7 years old, and they came home in 1935, and the country was still somewhat in the Depression at that point. So that had a lot to do with the economic times at that point in their life.
yeah, well, he made the mistake of telling the mission that he wasn't going back,
Okay.
because he had a furlough coming, but they cut him off right.
Really?
Yeah.
Had he started the hospital by that time?
Yeah, this was when he was coming back, and after all those years.
Well, what was it about Worcester College? Why did they let the missionary kids come to school there? Was it cheap, or was it free, or what was the
It was
arrangement?
Half tuition, and it was also extended to ministers' children, I think, as well as missionaries.
Okay.
Is that right, Tom, do you think?
Sounds
Half,
good, yeah.
half tuition, I
Did it
think.
apply to United Presbyterians also?
I think so. I think so, but I'm not certain. Although a lot of Martins went
Because
to
they all used to go
Concord.
down to
Muskingum.
Muskingum, because
Right.
that's where, I don't think they used to do it for United Presbyterians.
No, maybe not. That's right.
What was your dad? Which
He was
end of the church?
Was he a United Presbyterian? Or
No, he was
He was
Presbyterian.
Presbyterian.
They were Presbyterian.
No.
Presbyterian.
We didn't actually in India did we have United Presbyterians separate from
Yeah,
Presbyterians?
it was the United Presbyterian Church of North America.
Okay.
They joined with the Presbyterians in 1949 or so, 48 or 49.
There were two missions. And when you were at Worcester as a Mish kid, did you all live in separate, weren't there houses
I
or
wasn't at Worcester.
No, but
They all were, turned up to be in Section 8. They made sure it was 8th section rather than Section 8, because Section 8
yeah,
was
how you get out of the army with.
mental
Yes.
mental disability.
That's right. The 8th section, okay.
Well, I don't know what, they just all congregated there, I think.
Betty actually was the pathfinder of Worcester for that family, because they were expected to go to Muskingum. I mean, that was
Okay.
where they'd all been. And for some peculiar reason, she preferred to go to Worcester. I don't know how she knew about this.
I think it was her teacher in Canal Fulton.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I believe that's right.
That
yes.
was true for Mother, because she
Yes.
had a close friend who was her art teacher at Canal Fulton.
Yeah.
And she had come from the College of Worcester.
Okay, yeah.
But Muskingum was where Howard and Elizabeth met, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
Right.
Mhm.
And
And
where
is it
John went.
John and Anna, did they meet there too?
Greg and
Greg and Anna?
Well, I hope I'm correct, but I think that Anne was interested in the brother that was still a student at Muskingum,
that's
the
right.
one who died with the
Will.
appendicitis.
Yeah.
And then when he was gone, she transferred her interest to Greg.
Right. Will, I think. his name
Will,
was.
yes.
Yeah.
And Greg was quite a bit older than she.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Greg was in New Haven, I mean in New Concord, because he had just graduated from
Case was.
from medical school, and he was due to go into the army.
But didn't he teach for a while at
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Muskingum?
in other words, there was gap there before the Army took him in. And he taught at Muskingum. Now that's when he met your,
Met Ann.
And they said that the ants grilled him on whether he was a pre or a post. And it turns out he was the right. This was a
millennialist.
Premillennialist. In other words, the big argument between the fundamentalists and the not so fundamentalists were the premillennialists who felt that the millennium would happen before the Judgment Day. I mean, Christ would come here on earth and rule for 1,000 years. Then they'd have Judgment Day. And the post-millennium.
And what did the ants believe?
They believe they were posts.
Okay.
And your father was a post. I think most more liberal people tended to be posts.
Now, my mother used to say that Grandma Ann's aunts never should have been raising children.
That's correct, Francis.
And what were their names again?
I don't know their names,
Aunt
but
Bird?
when Ann's sister died, and Ann was about 2 and the baby died, and these aunts were there to take care of there were 5 children that were left without parents. Cousin Olive and her 2 brothers, and Ann and Aunt Lilius. And their father, Lilius and Ann's father, was a young man who had a difficult time with those older people because they were determined to tell him how to raise those children, and he left. And as an adult, I can remember her saying she could understand why he left because it was a difficult time, but she was always sorry that she did not know what happened to him because she always felt that she probably had brothers and sisters someplace because he was a young man. And the thing I remember about Mildred saying one time about her mother, that she had gone through life being very adaptable to new situations. You know, as a child, she had to adapt to losing a mother. She must have had some memories of her mother. She had to adapt to those older people taking care of them. And those aunts raised those 5 children, sent them all to college. They all went to Muskingum except for Cousin Olive, who went to the University of Pittsburgh, and she was needed at home to help with things there. And let's see, where else do I want to go?
But she was raised by those aunts.
Yes, and the adjustment of going to India with a 6-month-old baby, the adjustment of having children in, even though Greg was a doctor, it must not have been easy to live in India with younger children. She was dedicated to helping him with his profession. She was just a very capable, caring woman.
She didn't want my mother to go to boarding school either.
That's right. She wanted to be there to be supportive of her daughters, and maybe because she had lost her mother, she wanted to fill that role.
She wanted to escape from the thraldom of that household by going to college herself.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
she felt a sense of freedom when she went to college. Apparently, it must have been pretty rough. I met 2 of those great aunts.
Those people meant well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But
Trudy said that she told her that the only time as a child that she was happy was when she was with her mother's relatives, the Austins.
Yeah, I don't know that part of her life.
And they were just with the Austins for a month. She was just with the Austins for a month or 2, and then the Lang ants swooped down and swept her up along with them.
I always appreciated Mildred's assessment of her mother's attitude about things, and she was a very adaptable person. I can remember when she would come and visit us. She always adapted to the household she was visiting and how much we loved having her come.
We sure loved her coming down to Texas when I was in my teens.
Yeah.
And I remember Mom talking about grandmother didn't like teenagers. And she came down at a time when, I was becoming a teenager, and then my brother was right behind me, and then Greg was farther behind, but she loved us. It was so fun. I mean, I would drive her all over the place, because she'd never learned how to drive. Never learned how to drive in all those years. And I would drive her to the grocery store, and she'd give me her green stamps. And I saved up the green stamps and would buy things with the green stamps.
Well, that brings us to the time when she made that move to Texas.
She made the move to Texas because Trudy had a mastectomy.
Oh, right.
And she was going to take care of her kids if Trudy didn't survive.
And she had a heart attack while she was there.
Well, yeah, but then, she had a heart attack, and she was sitting in our living room, sort of recovering from the heart attack. And she says, maybe that house next door has been for sale now for several months. Maybe it's for sale for me.
Right. And she bought that house, and she wrote to Mildred. She had a house fully furnished in Wadsworth. Even the attic and the basement were full of things. And she wrote to Mildred with a complete list of what was to be sent from that house. And Mildred came from Kentucky, and John and I came from Illinois.
And you moved her.
Emptied that house in a whole weekend.
Oh my goodness.
Got a moving van for the furniture and stuff. Sent a bunch of stuff to the dump. Sent stuff to the Goodwill. I swear she had saved every glass jar she'd ever opened. And got the house cleaned and rented it in a long weekend to a couple that lived there for quite a long time. And so when we went to Texas to visit, it was just like being at Wadsworth because she had all of her familiar things with her.
And who took the furniture down?
We got a moving company to come.
Okay.
But it was they'd lived there since, she'd been there probably, do you remember the year of when that happened, Bruce? I have to think
68?
No, not that late. It was either 64 or 65.
Well, it was 65.
Did Mom have her cancer in 65?
No, she must have bought the house in 66.
Yeah.
I know that we came from Illinois, and we left Illinois the summer of 66. So it must have been the spring of 65 or 66, one of those years.
It must have been 66.
Okay. But it was a hard job, but it was, it's easy to dispose of somebody else's belongings.
This story has been told before, but I think it bears repetition. She came to visit us in California, and I discovered that she didn't have Social Security. She thought she deserved to have Social Security. And it turned out that because of her age, it would require only a few weeks, actually, to get. She had got a little Social Security credit for her rental in
Yes, she had a lady who
so she needed
rented
only
a room.
a number of weeks, maybe not even.
Yeah, it was very little.
Very little. So there was a very nice man that I knew in an independent bookstore in Westwood near UCLA, called Mr. Campbell. And I explained the situation to Mr. Campbell. This lady just needs 6 weeks, whatever it was. And so he took her on, and she did very well there. But the day when she'd completed this short time, she left. But with the assurance that she would get a minimal Social Security. Some time later, I said to Mr. Campbell, how much she appreciated this, and he said, well, I had some misgivings about taking on a 63, whatever year old lady it was, but she did a wonderful job, he said. She was very smart, too smart for the work I was giving her. So this was a great tribute to her, really.
Some of the treasures we found in that house, up in the attic, there were 2 big trunks of letters. And we thought, what are we going to do with those letters? So we sent them COD to Aunt Dora in Pennsylvania, thinking she would be the one who would have the most interest in taking care of these. We knew enough not to dispose of them, but we just didn't know how to make it a quick job. And I don't think Aunt Dora was very pleased with us, and I hope somebody in the Dora Clark family did something with those letters.
There's a funny story on Aunt Ann. Probably some of you already know it. Because a lot of family had gone to Muskingum, I guess she had Muskingum on her mind, but they took her to a football game at the College of Worcester when either Betty or Mildred were there. And Worcester was getting close to making a touchdown, and she got very excited and stood up and yelled, "Come on, Muskingum, make a home run." Wrong college, wrong game.
Yeah, well, I know how ashamed they were when after Muskingum won that game, John went down and helped pull down the Worcester goalposts, and parading them through.
Oops. I never knew that.
That was in his younger days.
Actually, Worcester was playing Oberlin, so Muskingum wasn't playing. I forgot to explain that. They were not playing in that game.
Yeah.
She was really backing Worcester, but she got excited and called it Muskingum.
Right.
So that was another time, apparently. Shame on John.
Okay, I'm gonna stop this because I want to make sure it saves.
From the company he worked for someone who was an executive in the company, and it was saying to him how much they appreciated his good work within the company.
Right.
His attitudes and what he contributed to the company had not gone unnoticed.
Good. Well,
That's
that's
nice.
tribute, yeah.
Yep.
Any comments on Martin traits that you see being carried forth into the next generation?
A good sense of humor.
Yeah, sense of humor would be the.
Exactly. A sense of humor, a caring for other people,
Right.
willing to share. I had 2 generous people in my life, my husband and my father.
Now we have a couple of aspiring artists in
Yeah,
this
that's
next generation.
Big derrieres.
See, she can say it, nobody gets upset.
An appreciation and the necessity for understanding education,
Oh,
and the
absolutely.
willing to make sacrifices to have that education come about.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Next to organised religion, I think education was the most important thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very, very
Well,
important.
I don't have any friends who can say that their great-grandmother went to college.
That's right, that's extraordinary.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is extraordinary.
They're great.
Yes.
Because
That's right.
Elizabeth and John Howard were both graduates of Muskingum College.
And Frances and Gertrude, my mother, both got master's degrees
Yeah.
That's
at
right,
Columbia
that was another thing,
in the
yeah.
1920s, which was
Unheard of.
unheard of. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they all shared an equal respect for people who were different.
Interesting.
Good.
Yeah, you've done a great job.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'd like to ask the question of you young people who perhaps have never heard some of these stories. How do you feel about hearing these stories? Has it made those people that you've not known come alive in your thoughts?
Definitely. I love to hear all the stories about, all those funny stories and everybody putting in, what they remember about something they said or, and like my question about hobbies, that's always interesting to me because I think that's something that's carried down.
Did they talk about what Grandma did in her final years? She was a volunteer at several things, and one of the things she would do is repair clothes or make clothes for the homeless or the needy, whatever. And she did a lot of volunteering at the church, doing all sorts of things there. Let's see, what else did she do, Dad? She played 84, the domino game. She had ladies coming over the house all the time playing 84. What else did she do? Oh, gardening. Oh my gosh. Yeah. The woman had gardens out the backyard. She had an area where the clothesline was. You had your two poles in the clothesline, had your clothesline across. She had, at some point, either she or maybe the owner right before her, had bricked in and made a garden underneath that from one pole to the other. She had daylilies in there. The whole thing was daylilies. She was always out there gardening. I think Mom got her gardening bug from Grandma, and then I got my gardening bug from the two of them, watching do stuff. Yeah. And poor Grandma, she had circulation problems in her legs in her later years, and those bugs would bite her, and then her legs always looked like they'd been eaten or something. That's kind of not a good thing to remember, but.
Well, I can remember, of course, we had a swimming pool that her bedroom sort of overlooked. And Kathy, when she was up at Austin College, she just cut loose and had a great time, and her whole group would come swooping down.
About 16 to 20 of us.
Maybe about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. And go and have a great time at the pool, and then they'd sleep all over our house.
And Grandma's house. We had a few, Grandma hosted a couple of them too.
But of course, this whole racket was keeping her awake and everything.
She was deaf though. She just had to take her hearing aids out. But I think she kept them in so she could listen for
That's what she gets for having grandchildren.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, she loved us.
There's a funny story about, I'm going back another generation, to Howard and Elizabeth. And he was a rather frail man, and he'd had ill health, I think, as a baby or a child. And she was a very determined, no-nonsense kind of a person. Well, after they retired, there was a porch and also a row of, I think, those heavy spirea bushes. And somehow he stepped off the porch and fell into the spirea bushes, and he was lying there all spread eagle, and she stepped out into the porch and said, "Howard, what are you doing there?" And he said, "Meditating, Elizabeth, just meditating." But it sort of captured their two personalities, I thought.
I remember Grandpa doing his violin in his bedroom up in Highland Avenue. And Grandma, years later, blamed her deafness on his love of music. And she could not carry a note. She really couldn't sing well at all, but she loved to stand next to me in church and hear me sing. I have a decent voice.
Kay, as a very young child, when she was talking, took to calling him Greg rather than Grandpa. And at first I said, I really don't think that's respectful. And I must have said something to Kay in front of him, and he said, "Oh, don't tell her not to do that." He said, "You don't know how much I love it."
Oh, that's neat.